Hey everyone, welcome back to CK Cycles. Well, it's time to get back to another project that's kind of stalled out. After rebuilding the engine in the CL125, it has sat for quite some time. In this episode, I want to get a lot of work done and get this project back fully up to speed. So, we're going to be changing the tires, rebuilding the forks, and replacing the headlight bucket. Once those jobs are done, I can get the engine reinstalled and start it up for the first time after rebuild. A challenging part of getting the old broken headlight bucket off of the triple tree is that the speedometer cable travels directly through the headlight bucket, and all of the wiring seemed to be wrapped tightly around the speedometer cable. So it just took a little effort to get this speedometer cable through the bucket to free it up so I could pull it off. It can seem a little bit daunting to have to replace the headlight bucket, since essentially all the wiring needs to be unplugged that is contained within the headlight bucket. But I just slowed down, took my time, made sure that I was hooking the correct wire up to the correct wire following the wire colors, and from there I was able to get everything hooked back up again. A new set of tires on an old bike really make it look sharp. The forks on this bike needed some attention. One of the boots was cracked and separated, and both seals were leaking. Getting the forks removed from the triple tree tubes was pretty challenging. On the upper portion of the inner fork tube, there is this circular lip. That lip fits into a recessed area on the upper plate of the triple tree clamp. I had to beat the forks out, and I found that using a rod that fit inside of this lip was best, so not to damage the lip, since the outer diameter of that lip receded and sits inside the upper plate of the triple tree. I thought about just kind of pounding on the bolt here, the cap bolt, but I was afraid that I would probably damage the threads inside, and so I really did not want to do that. Once I found this rod that fit perfectly inside this lip, it became easy to get the forks out. Okay, so you saw some of the difficulty I had in removing the forks out of the triple tree on the bike, and I had an even more difficult time trying to disassemble the forks themselves. As you can see, the inner fork tubes here are significantly rusted and very, very pitted. And this is located underneath the sleeve here that is a guide for the spring on the fork. So moisture got in there and just absolutely rotted the fork. On top of that, there is a clip on the inside diameter of the fork, and that clip essentially, holds the fork in place inside the outer tube, and that clip goes on. First you install the tube, then the seal, and then the clip over the tube. And on this fork I was able to get the clip out, although heavily rusted and corroded. So some moisture sat on top of the fork. I think moisture got down into the forks, and moisture got underneath the boots, and rotted the fork out, and also rotted the clips. And on the left fork, I could not get a portion of the clip out. Let me see if I can show it to you. You can kind of see it start right here and go around. That would not come out. And I soaked that, and I soaked that, and I soaked that. And finally I tried to take a chisel to it just to kind of knock it free. And when that happened, I ended up breaking the upper portion, cracking the upper portion of this outer tube. Then essentially it broke off. So I broke that outer tube, and I could not get that clip out. But I'm going to grab a pair of pliers and just see, now that I can actually reach it a little bit, if I can even pull that out. It is just, it's not reusable in any way, but, oh, of course, pops right out. Anyways, it can be frustrating working on stuff that's this old, and it just kind of rots in. But so I just got my forks back from the machine shop. A buddy of mine was able to chuck up the inner fork tubes here in his lathe and really cleaned up the rusted spots incredibly well. I sent along, I believe this is called a bushing. I sent along one of these bushings just as a, to make sure that it got cleaned up sufficiently. Although the bushing does not slide in this area, this was just sent along just to make sure that it got cleaned up sufficiently. It cleaned up great. It cleaned up great. Now, and some of you might be asking, well, I mean, it still shows signs of rust. Is that going to show through? Are you going to see that? Is that going to impact its functionality? And I do not believe that it will. And I'll use this other fork that I purchased to kind of show what's going on here. So you have the outer fork tube, the inner fork tube, and then you have I don't know if this will come out, but a plastic sleeve that sits in that area. and then an outer spring that sits in that area, and then a rubber boot that goes over the outer spring. And all of that is contained here. And you can see on this other fork where it's rusted out. I really couldn't locate like a brand new set of these. So it was either try to find a used set, which I did here, but these are off a CL, I think 100, and they are actually a shorter inner tube, so I did not want to use them. And I also believe that this one is bent because the sleeve will not slide. So I think that there's a bend in this tube, and they're shorter, so I didn't want to use them. But I will be using several parts. So right here, this represents 2 complete sets of forks, most of which of the parts are common between the 2 forks. I think the only differences possibly are the inner tubes and the external spring length. Those are different. So I'll have to use the original springs here, and now that I've gotten the original fork tubes cleaned up, I will use these cleaned up. And then the springs and the spring guides. But before I do that, I am going to paint the inner fork tubes here where they were rusted with some grease. Because this section will again sit underneath those plastic spring guide tubes and underneath the spring. So I'm just going to use a little bit of grease here just to maybe try to protect these rusty spots if possible. All of this will be underneath the plastic fork cover, so you shouldn't be able to see it at all. Next are the springs. Clean these up and just threw some primer on them to hopefully seal them up a little bit. I do have these, and I'm not sure if I should have put those on the spring first or if they'll slide in easily. Oh, perfect. Alrighty, so who knew that rebuilding forks on a little 125 would turn into such a big job? But that's what you get sometimes with these old bikes. Next, we'll be installing the engine back in the motorcycle and getting it prepared for its first run. This is Chris for CK Cycles. We'll see you later.